Find other great podcasts like this one at podmoth.network.
Yo, what is up, my friends? Welcome back to What the French Toast, your favorite podcast on the internet that leaves you asking yourself the question, what the French toast did I just listen to? I'm Skyler.
I'm Megan.
And today we have a story that is going to encapsulate exactly what I just said. But before we get into that,
I hope all of our stories encapsulate. Encapsulate, is that the right word?
Encapsulate. I think that's what I said.
Either way, I hope all of our stories always fit into what the French toast did I just listened to, because every time we record, I feel like every time I do my research, I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Yeah, like we've talked about it before, where it's like we have questionable search history. Like the poor FBI agents that are watching our search history have like their work cut out for them.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. No, we're going to get arrested one day. Actually, I hope not.
Well, like imagine one of us one day does snap.
No.
It's going to take our FBI agent forever to actually figure it out that we did snap. Does that make sense? Like, because we already are crazy and searching all sorts of weird, messed up stuff.
Could you imagine that? I mean, yeah, they did search like how to murder somebody, but to be fair, that was a weekly thing. Like
they've only done this for like every week for the last 3+ years.
Right. It's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
We had no reason to suspect otherwise. Podcasts are a very real part of society nowadays. Speaking of podcasts, big shout out to Podmoth.
Because guess what, guys? We're part of a network.
It only took us 3 years, but we did it.
So be excited to hear not only about our show, but about some other similar shows. And yeah, we're excited.
Nice. Proud of you, Megan.
Yeah, I did it all by myself. Skyler didn't do anything.
She did. Yeah, literally not a single thing. Yeah.
He sent me a thumbs up emoji to say he approved, and that was it.
Okay, but to be fair, I was at work.
Okay, to be fair, so was I.
Yeah, well, your job is a little more relaxed than mine is.
Shut up. We're not going to have this conversation or this fight right now.
Matter of fact, my boss's boss comes into your job.
That's true.
So
watch your mouth.
Yeah.
I'm buddies with your boss's boss.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm Mandy.
And I'm Avery.
We're the hosts and creators of Thick Thighs and Creepy Vibes.
Join us as we take a deep dive into the macabre and the unexplained.
Listen every Wednesday as we take you on a chilling journey that transports you to all corners of the Great White North.
Let's boot those Sunday scaries while we take a rip into the harrowing tales of the haunted and the supernatural phenomena that defy explanation.
So grab your ketchup chips
and your Caesars and make sure to
creep it real.
So today's story is about something I do like blanket trigger warning for every single story that we cover. But today I want to give an extra blanket trigger warning.
It seems like
racism.
we've had to. I was gonna say, it seems like we've had to do that a lot lately.
Yeah.
Extra trigger warnings. Our stories are getting heavy, y'all.
Our stories are getting more in depth. Yeah, they're getting heavier. Racism is basically the biggest one here, and it's going to be infuriating. But unfortunately, 'twas the circumstance at hand, and what I'm about to present to you guys. Have you ever heard of Rubin Carter?
No.
Okay, so Rubin Carter was born on May 6, 1937, in Clifton, New Jersey. Right. His early years were pretty ordinary. Well, actually, some might say they were anything but ordinary. Others might say they were ordinary, depending on what part of the world you grew up in. But on the surface, everything kind of seemed typical for him, right? He was just a young boy growing up in Paterson, New Jersey in the 1940s. Everything was going good. He was the fourth of 7 children. He was raised in a working class family. His father fourth of 7 children. That's a lot. His father ran an ice delivery service, and his mother was just kind of kept the household together and everything like that. But behind closed doors, his world was shaped by a pretty strict, often harsh disciplinarian father, which created a lot of tension, a lot of emotional stress, a lot of strain for him from a young age early on. But he wasn't a troublemaker, like not by nature, right? He was fiercely protective of himself, his family, and his friends. But unfortunately, that would get him into some trouble. Now, you make your own conclusions on whether or not what you think he did was right. But him being protective of his friends is something that led to a pivotal moment in his life when he was 11 years old. Rubin would go on to actually stab a man with a Boy Scout knife, claiming that the man he stabbed had actually tried to molest one of his friends earlier that day.
So he's fiercely protective of the people that he cares about.
Fiercely protective of the people he cares about, 100%. However, that act led him to Jamesburg State Home for Boys, which is a juvenile reformatory where he was sentenced to 6 years in juvie. However, Rubin actually would go on to escape from the state home for boys at age 17, or which was around 1954. So he served like 3 years of a 6-year sentence. And while the exact details of how he physically broke out aren't widely documented, it is clear that it was a deliberate escape. He planned it out. It wasn't just something that he planned it out. It was a whole thing, but he planned a full-on escape from juvie. However, what he did next is interesting, and it took a lot of people by surprise, because instead of laying low like you would imagine he would do from escaping from juvie.
And this is still a teenager, right?
This is a 17-year-old. Yeah, he's
17 at this point. Okay.
At this point, right. But instead of laying low, he actually makes a pretty bold move where he goes and he enlists to join the U.S. Army. Which, yeah, he just said straight up, I'm going to do it. Now, he did lie about his background to be able to get into the Army, which to some people believes that he saw the military as a way to kind of rewrite his story, like his life, right? So he did. He lies about it. He joins the Army.
What year is this?
At this point, it's going to be 1954.
Okay.
So while in the Army, he joins a segregated unit. He faced a lot of tough conditions, but he still managed to find things in the military that he liked to do. For example, he would actually become a boxer while in the military. So he went on to win 2 European light welterweight championships while stationed in West Germany. They would say that his talent, his aggressive style, right? I know, right? They would say that his talent, his style, him being aggressive earned him a spot on the Army's boxing team after he famously knocked out a heavyweight in a spontaneous match. Now, mind you, if you know anything about boxing, he's a light welterweight. He knocked out a heavyweight. That's weight classes away.
I don't know what that means,
big deal.
But
yeah, that's a pretty big deal. Basically, I mean, he was a really good boxer. He was good at what he did. And Carter himself would say that it was in those barracks and those boxing rings that it began to shape his identity and define who he was. But with that being said, in 1956, he would go on to face multiple court-martials and was discharged for being unfit for service because they figure out that he did lie to get into the Army. In 1957, unfortunately, his past would kind of catch up with him a little bit because he got arrested again, but this time it was for a purse-snatching charge, and that landed him in Trenton State Prison, which was one of New Jersey's toughest prisons at the time. And that gave him 4 years in jail to kind of reflect, think about all the things that had led him to that decision. And so he did. He wasted no time. As soon as he got inside prison, he began to refocus. He started training relentlessly for boxing. He started lifting weights. He started shadow boxing. He said he would sharpen his mind. He said it was during this period that he also briefly explored Islam. And he actually adopted briefly the name Rubin Abdul Carter, which is a sign of him kind of searching for identity and meaning. He also took Dale Carnegie courses at this time to overcome a lifelong stutter that he had, which again showed a hunger not just to fight, but to communicate. He was trying to be smarter. He was trying to improve his life, which is honestly a win for him. Good for the guy.
And this is all while he's in prison.
This is while he's in prison, the second time around, yeah. So, well, I guess the first time around, because the first time it was juvie. But, yeah, when he walks out of the prison gates in 1961, he was a free man. But he's also stated that he was ready. He was ready to face life. He was ready to find things that continued to pursue his fury of injustice. He wanted to channel the anger that he had inside, the frustration of what he said was a broken system, the pain of his community into something explosive. And he chose to channel all of that into boxing. So he did. He didn't hesitate. As soon as he was released from prison in 1961, he stepped straight into the boxing ring. He joined a local boxing gym. He began training with a lot of focus. He showed up daily. He was pushing through. He actually was very, very, very fast, had super fast hands, which quickly caught the eye of trainers and promoters alike. And it wasn't long before people in the boxing world started taking notice of his speed as an intensity, which gave him the nickname, the Hurricane. So he's Rubin the Hurricane Carter, right? By the end of that same year, he had actually launched his professional boxing career, which is hard to do. Immediately, he was a fighter that a lot of people took note of. He was hungry. He was explosive. He was a fighter in the middleweight division, and he started immediately shaking things up in the middleweight division of professional boxing. And in 1963, Rubin Carter would go on to face Emil Griffith, which at the time was the reigning welterweight world champion. But he went on to face him in a non-title match, so the belt wasn't up for grabs. However, the outcome was very, very quickly because Carter knocked Emil Griffith out in the first round. Fight started, first round knockout, which is an impressive victory. It sent a very clear message.
And some of you know exactly what Skyler's talking about. And then the rest of us are like, okay, I know what knockout means, but overall, I don't know how big of an accomplishment this is.
To learn how to box 5 years prior to this situation and knock out a world champion is insane. Like,
I can believe that. Thank you for breaking it down.
It's absurd. Like, it just doesn't normally happen. I mean, boxing is a sport. You can get knocked out from getting hit in the right spot. It happens to everyone at some point in their life. But anyway, yeah, so it was an impressive victory. Sent a clear message to the rest of the world that he was ready. He was ready to fight. He was ready to be a champion. So a year later, in December of 1964, Carter got a shot at the middleweight championship against Joey Giardello, which was the reigning champion at this time. And it was a hard-fought 15-round fight that would end up in a split decision loss for Rubin Carter. Though, he didn't walk away with the title. A lot of people saw him fight that night, thought he actually won the fight because it was a very close loss, a very split decision, which means some judges rooted for him, said he won the fight. Some judges voted against him, said he didn't win the fight. Split decision loss, it's kind of iffy at times. Sure. Really sketchy. But with that being said, Rubin Carter remained training. He said, hey, listen, like, I want another shot at the belt. So he did. He continued to train. He continued to fight. But despite his success in the ring, mind you, he had kind of gained a lot of fame, a lot of popularity, specifically in his town. A lot of people had saw him. He gained notoriety. His relationship with law enforcement wasn't very good. It was bad, and it got worse because in the summer of 1964, he was quoted in the Saturday Evening Post expressing heavy frustration over police presence in black neighborhoods, which was a stance that didn't sit well with authorities at all. He was very outspoken on his views on racial injustice. That, combined with his flamboyant lifestyle of nightclubs and driving expensive cars and going to bars all the time, only made police more mad at Rubin Carter. All that combined, plus his juvenile record that he had, plus the purse snatching incident, made everything so much worse for police. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, he allegedly had made statements advocating violence in the fight for racial inequality towards law enforcement. It's safe to say the police, law enforcement, and Rubin Carter, not friends, not close, didn't like each other very much. Whether or not those...
Question, is this still like in New Jersey area?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Still in New Jersey, yeah. Whether or not he actually made the claims of, hey, go fight the police, or hey, incite violence on the police, whether those were exaggerated or just like a misunderstood thing that he said, the police painted Carter as a threat, not just in the boxing ring, but in the eyes of the law. They painted Rubin Carter as a threat. However, he didn't, going back to the boxing, he didn't win the title in 1964. So, he didn't walk away from boxing. He continued to train. And over the next 2 years, he trained hard. He stayed determined. He stayed active. He ended up having 9 more fights in 2 years, which is a pretty heavy amount of fights in 2 years. He then, after those 9 fights, he got the news he'd been waiting for. He was going to have another shot at the middleweight title. This time, the champion's name was Dick Tiger. It's not a fake name. That's a real name. His name was Dick Tiger. That was the middleweight champion. At this time, Rubin Carter was excited. He said, this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. So he gets back in the gym. He starts training relentlessly. He's ready for the shot of the middleweight title. But before he could get back in the ring to fight for the middleweight title, everything would change. Because in the early hours of June 17th, 1966, around 2:30 in the morning, 2 armed men, one with a 12-gauge shotgun and the other with a 32 caliber pistol, would enter a bar. The bar that they entered was the Lafayette Bar and Grill in Paterson, New Jersey. Those 2 men that would enter the bar shot 4 white patrons. One of them was bartender James Oliver, who was a machinist. The other one was Fred Noyax. The other was Willie Marins, and the other one was Hazel Tanis. Those attackers opened fire. They didn't say a word. They didn't warn anybody. They just walked in and started shooting people. The victims, James Oliver, who was the machinist, he was shot in the back with a shotgun and he died instantly. Fred Noyax, who was shot behind the ear with the pistol, also died instantly. And then Willie Marins was shot in the head, however, survived, though he did lose sight in one eye, but he did not die. And then Hazel Tanis, which was the waitress, she was shot multiple times and actually ended up dying a month later from her injuries. So in October of 1966, Carter was arrested for the June 17th triple homicide at the Lafayette Bar and Grill in Paterson, New Jersey. Him and his friend named John Artis had already been questioned, by the way, the night of the crime. The night that the crime happened, they were pulled over while they were driving down the road because they, quote, matched an eyewitness. The eyewitness's accounts were 2 black men in a white car. So that's the description that the two men matched. And they were pulled over. They were taken into the station for questioning. But at the time, they were released because the surviving victim, the one victim that survived, said to police, those are not the two men that shot the place up. So the police said, okay, you know what? Grand jury at the time clears John Artis and Rubin Carter the charges. They said, you're free to go. Well, months later, the case was reopened. This specific time, the state presents two new eyewitnesses, a guy named Alfred Bello and another guy named Arthur D. Bradley. So where did they get these brand new witnesses from, you may ask? It's a good question. The two men that they got, those witnesses, the brand new eyewitnesses the police just pulled out of thin air, were two criminals that at the exact same time of the robbery, or the exact same time of the shooting, were committing a robbery in the same location. So instead of police saying, hey, these two people were committing armed robbery in the same location that these people were shot, let's not question them. Let's actually use them as eyewitnesses. Those two people stated that they saw John Artis and Rubin Carter fleeing the bar right after the shootings, which is why they were arrested. So with that being said, the trial now that follows this was riddled with inconsistencies. The prosecution offered no physical evidence whatsoever linking Carter or John Artis to the crime. There was no physical evidence. There were no fingerprints. There were no murder weapons. There was no blood stains in the car. The bullets and the shotgun shells found at the scene did not match any weapons that were linked to Rubin Carter or John Artis. And then conveniently enough, police just completely failed to conduct paraffin tests to check for gunpowder residue on either Carter or Artis's hands. So, let's just not do that at all, but let's arrest these two for a murder. The motive behind the murders was completely speculative. All that they could come up with is that, well, the whole reason that John Artis and Rubin Carter allegedly killed those people is because it was retaliation of a black, owner that had happened earlier that same day. He was a tavern owner that was shot and killed, and well, really, John Artis and Rubin Carter were mad, so that's why they shot the four white people. That's the only thing they could come up with.
So they turned it into a race war that wasn't a race war.
They turned it into a race war that wasn't the race war.
Or at least not for the people they're claiming to have been the people who did it.
Right. The two eyewitnesses, the two random eyewitnesses that were committing a robbery, questionable. That's putting it nicely, right? Because
that's not a reliable witness.
And it gets so much worse. There were two white gentlemen. One's name was Alfred Bello. The other was Arthur D. Bradley. Bello later admitted to police a while later. He said, well, the police told me that they would take care of me if I got in trouble again, if they implicated Artis and Carter. So basically, the police approached Alfred Bello and Arthur Bradley and said, hey, if you implicate these two people that we have in mind for this crime, we'll take care of you if you get in trouble again. And then they were allegedly offered early parole, reduced sentences, and $12,000 each to implicate John Artis and Rubin Carter for these murders that happened.
That's crazy.
On June 29th, 1967, Rubin Carter and John Artis were convicted of triple murder, and they were sentenced to 3 life terms. So why did they get arrested? Some say it's because law enforcement and Rubin Carter did not like each other, right? He was already on law enforcement's radar. He already had a record. He already had a juvenile record. He was very outspoken about racial injustice. He was known for his flashy cars, flamboyant lifestyle. A lot of people say the police were jealous of the money that he made and how he spent and how he lived his life. Some officers saw him as a public enemy. One detective that was involved in the case was also involved in his childhood arrest like 18 years earlier. And on top of that, it's widely speculated the police just felt a lot of pressure to close the case quickly, right? Because Carter had visibility, he had a past record, and he had a lot of defiance, made him a pretty convenient suspect. That mixed with the use of incentivized witnesses helped build the narrative that the police wanted to build. Even though there was no physical evidence, the physical evidence was completely non-existent, they would go on to arrest John Artis and Rubin Carter and sentence them to 3 life terms. Now the two gentlemen are in prison. While serving time at the Trenton State, and then later he was at Rahway State Prison, Rubin Carter remained unwavering in his claim of innocence. He, in fact, went so far as to refuse to conform. He declined to wear prison uniforms. He rejected his prison meals. He was constantly, committing acts of protest that defined his defiant stance against his wrongful imprisonment. He became, in many people's eyes, a symbol of resistance. And because he was a celebrity himself by this point, he inspired celebrities, activists, legal advocates, and many, many other people to rally behind his cause. Carter would spend long stretches in solitude, and he actually used his time to immerse himself in books. He studied law, philosophy, history, metaphysics. He studied more in religion. He would actually go on to make a quote that at the time was held quite famous by him, and he said, quote, "They can incarcerate my body, but never my mind," end quote. He would really go on to study anything that could help him make sense of the system that he felt had silenced him. So out of that solitary search came something very powerful.
Yeah.
In 1970, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the purpose of jail, or a lot of the times the purpose of jail is rehabilitation. And it sounds like he was taking full advantage of the rehabilitation and trying to grow and be a better person and a better version of himself anytime he was in jail. Other than, I guess, the time in juvie when he, like, purposefully planned an escape.
Well, sure.
But
you do
he
what you
was
got
a
to do,
teenager,
I guess.
so his frontal lobe wasn't fully developed at that point.
Well, sure. Yeah, that's one way to. That's fair. That's a fair point. In 1974, Carter publishes an autobiography called "The 16th Round," which is a story from number one contender to inmate number 45,472. And it wasn't just a memoir, but it was a declaration of his innocence, a condemnation of corruption, and a call for justice. The book did quickly catch on, and it caught the attention of activists, artists, the public, and it turned Carter from just some forgotten inmate to this national symbol of resilience and resistance. And among all of those moved by his book was a guy named Bob Dylan. The musician. The musician. He visited Rubin Carter behind bars and then wrote the iconic song "Hurricane," released in 1976 on the album Desire. And then Bob Dylan would go on to perform the song across the country during his Rolling Thunder Revue tour, making Carter's case now a national conversation. Many other people, many other celebrities, including legendary boxer Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, the greatest of all time, also lent his voice to the fight, joining a wave of support from other celebrities to civil rights leaders to public figures to people who believe Carter was in fact wrongly convicted and deserved justice. That doesn't end there, though. Because of all of this public attention, Rubin Carter remained behind bars. His legal team, though, would stay very actively engaged. They were driven by the conviction that he had been wrongly accused, unjustly imprisoned. They maintained constant communication with him. They shared updates. They strategized appeals together. They were digging much deeper into the case's flaws. And then one day in 1974, late 1974, get this, Megan, both Alfred Bello and Arthur Bradley, the two eyewitnesses that were pulled out of thin air that were committing a crime, they each separately recanted their testimony, admitting that they had lied to receive favorable treatment from police. And then Rubin Carter's attorneys got a hold of these two guys, and they tracked down a tape, a police interview revealing the promises made to both Bello and Bradley in exchange for their cooperation. So now this whole claim of them receiving the money, that's not just a theory. That is real. The tape was recovered. That did in fact happen. And so Carter's legal team, led by Myron Beldock, tracked down the tape, and through multiple legal channels and investigative pressure, they were able to kind of make a lot of headway on that. Around this same time, the New York Times ran a major expose on the case, highlighting the tape, the broader misconduct that helped bring the public attention to this issue. And then eventually, all of these things prompted the New Jersey State Supreme Court to unanimously overturn Carter and Artis' convictions, and the two men were released on bail.
Yes.
However, their second trial begins on November 11th, 1976, which is 6 months after they were released on bail. And on the stand, Bello comes back and reverses his recantation, once again identifying Carter and Artis as the gunman. And so the second trial concluded with a guilty verdict, and on December 20th, 1976, the two were sentenced back in prison. So they were out for 6 months before being reconvicted and sent back in prison. Now, here's my issue with it. Despite recanting their testimony, despite there being tapes that were found that literally implicated the police for
and
saying,
show,
listen,
like coercion, yeah,
right, and
bribery.
showing coercion and bribery. The police weren't in trouble, nor were Alfred Bellow nor Arthur Bradley ever convicted of perjury in connection with the case.
That's
Which, if you don't know what
wild.
perjury is, it's lying under oath. And both men said that they lied under oath. There is proof that they lied under oath. And somehow, against all of that actual proof, the two men were sentenced back in prison to another life sentence. Well, it's not another life sentence, but to continue out their life sentences.
Sure.
And after the reconviction in late 1976, Carter and Artis were once again sentenced back to life in prison. The verdict, of course, crushing. They had hope, a brief hope, for 6 months of their release, but they didn't stop fighting. Carter's legal team regrouped. They were determined to challenge the outcome. And over the next several years, they pursued appeals. They gathered new evidence. They continued working closer with Carter behind closed bars, but unfortunately, none of those appeals, they would all get denied for retrial. John Artis, however, was actually offered in 1974. They said, hey, if you tell us, like, you know, Rubin Carter killed those people, we'll let you go. And John Artis denied that. He refused to implicate his friend. Many would say that he was a model prisoner, so he was actually somehow paroled in 1981. So John Artis, he gets out of there. So he's good. However, Carter's legal team continued to fight. In 1982, the New Jersey Supreme Court would go on to reject their appeal for a third trial in a narrow 4-3 decision, affirming the prior convictions. So yeah, he's in prison. He's had a long time to come to terms. He's come to terms with this reality. He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life. That's what he's thinking. He withdrew from others. He spent his time reading. He spent his time studying, reflecting about his marriage to a lady named May Thelma, which he had a son and a daughter. That marriage did quietly unravel, and at his request, she actually stopped visiting, and they did get a divorce in 1984. But yeah, in 1980, however, a little bit of hope starts to shine through, right? A teenager named Lesra Martin, who lived in Brooklyn, read Carter's autobiography, The 16th Round, reached out to him. Martin, who's living with a group of Canadian entrepreneurs who had actually taken on the responsibility of Carter's education. That group consisted of Sam Chiton, Terry Swinton, and Lisa Peters. Soon, they all formed a deep bond with Carter, and they joined the fight for his release, working with his lawyer. Their efforts would intensify in 1983 when they began working alongside the New York legal team and Myron Beldock, which is his lawyer, a guy named Louis Steele, and a constitutional scholar named Leon Friedman. Together, they all came together and they pursued a writ of habeas corpus from the U.S. District Court Judge Lee Sarakin, which was a move that would change everything. Now, if you don't know what a writ of habeas corpus is a powerful legal tool that protects individuals from unlawful imprisonment. It challenges the legality of someone's detention. It doesn't challenge whether they're guilty, but it instead challenges whether they're being held lawfully. It requires the custodian, which is the prison official or the law enforcement agency, to justify the person's detention in a court. If the court finds that the imprisonment is unlawful, the person can be released. So, U.S. District Judge H. Lee Sarakin, who reviewed the extensive record, including the evidence of racial bias, withheld polygraph results, and the prosecution's reliance on compromised witnesses, months of deliberation, Judge Sarakin would hand down his ruling on November 7th, 1985. And the judge overturned Rubin Carter's conviction, declaring that, quote, the extensive record clearly demonstrates that the petitioner's convictions were predicated upon an appeal to racism rather than reason, and the concealment rather than disclosure, end quote. The state of New Jersey continued, however, to challenge the ruling all the way to the Supreme Court. So the state of New Jersey, whenever Judge Sarakin overturned it, the state of New Jersey fought the overturning. They took it all the way to the Supreme Court. The state of New Jersey did not want Rubin Carter out of jail. They were livid at this overturning. So they took it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in February of 1988, the Passaic County judge formally dismisses the original 1966 indictments against Carter and his co-defendant, John Artis, bringing a 22-year legal battle to a close. But the really effed up part is, after all 22 years of wrongful imprisonment, Rubin Carter nor John Artis would receive financial restitution from the state of New Jersey after the wrongful conviction.
Was that like a part of the ruling that they didn't have to pay that, or it just didn't come up at? I mean, I'm guessing it wasn't as common back then for...
It didn't happen. Well, restitution didn't come aboard until like the early 2000s. So at the time, it wasn't like a thing. But it's just a little ridiculous.
I mean, it's not a shock to me that the state of New Jersey would fight it all the way up to the Supreme Court, because regardless of restitution or anything like that, anything that gets overturned because of their wrongdoing is all the way against them and shines a bad light on them. So now they have to admit that they messed up and that they did something awful. Not only did they allow their law enforcement, to coerce people, but then that they also supported that twice, actually, and allowed it to continue to happen regardless of the fact that it's pretty clear that Carter was totally 100% without a doubt innocent.
It's infuriating. But after his release, Rubin Carter relocated to Toronto, where he lived with that same group that had kind of championed his freedom. He collaborated with the guy named Sam Chiton and Terry Swinton on Lazarus and the Hurricane, which is the untold story of the freeing of Rubin the Hurricane Carter. And that book was published in 1991. Carter actually would later go on to marry the commune leader Lisa Peters, though the couple did separate whenever he left the group's shared home. In 1993, the World Boxing Council honored Rubin Carter with an honorary championship belt, recognizing his legacy in the ring, and he went on to serve as an executive director of the Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted, operating out of his Toronto residence. He also held board positions with the Southern Center for Human Rights in Atlanta and the Alliance for Prison Justice in Boston, continuing his advocacy for justice and reform. In 1999, widespread interest in the story of Carter was received with a major motion picture called The Hurricane, which was directed by Norma Jewison. And in 2004, Rubin Carter founded Innocence International, which was a nonprofit dedicated to advocating for the wrongfully convicted. Unfortunately, his health declined, and in February of 2014, he was battling prostate cancer, which...
that's horrible.
He would actually issue a powerful plea for the exoneration of a gentleman named David McCallum, which is a Brooklyn man in prison since 1985 for a crime that Rubin Carter did not think he committed. And in an op-ed published in the New York Daily News titled Hurricane Carter's Dying Wish, Carter reflected on McCallum's case and in his own journey and said, quote, "If I find a heaven after this life, I'll be quite surprised." He said, "In my own years on this planet, though I lived in hell for the first 49 years and I've been in heaven for the past 28 years, to live in a world where truth matters and justice, however late, really happens, well, that would be a world that all of us, that would be heaven for all of us," end quote. And then, unfortunately, 2 months later after that, on April 20th of 2014, Rubin Carter would go on to pass away, they say, peacefully in his Toronto home at the age of 76. The results of complications from his prostate cancer. Though in his final days, they say it was not marked by bitterness, but a continued fight for truth and a legacy that still inspires many, many people to this day. And that is the story of Rubin Carter, a man who was wrongfully imprisoned and ended up getting justice 22 years later.
That's probably one of my favorite cases you've ever covered.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. It took a long time to do research on it. And I also wanted to pay my respects to his life,
Yeah.
As somebody that used to box myself, it's obviously, he is in boxing history, right? So it's I'd heard of him in the past, but yeah, I didn't know his life was like that.
That's crazy. I mean, wow. I don't even think I have words for it. It's amazing. Amazing in a sense of he went through so much, overcame it, and then continued to use the rest of his life when he could have been bitter and resentful.
He was a fighter. Yeah.
He turned that into something positive and probably helped dozens, if not hundreds of other people with, even if it wasn't directly, through his work. So that's really awesome.
Yeah. He was a fighter. Nobody can take that away from him.
That's true.
But yeah, guys, that was a story that moved us. That moved me, at least. But yeah, Megan, anything to add?
No.
Rubin Carter, rest in peace, brother. Rest in love. And yeah, don't be dumb. Love you guys. See you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.